Hello and welcome back to Mr. Miller's Art Room. The last time we were talking about overlapping shapes, I mentioned that I was going to introduce another way that you can take your overlapping shapes, which helps to create this illusion of space, and pump it up a notch, and that's what we're going to work on right now. I also asked that everybody try to create a composition or a picture utilizing 20 shapes that overlap with one another. After you did that, you would erase off the pencil marks, and the only thing that you'd be left with are the ink lines. What we're going to do today is we're going to talk about light and a particular method of creating illusionary space called drop shadows. Drop shadows are an illustrative technique tool for creating the illusion of space with light. One of the things that we have to understand about light is that when we see a shadow is not opposite of light, it is the absence of light. So what happens is that when an object, and you can kind of see a shadow right here in the video, when an object blocks light from a particular direction, it creates a shadow in the opposite side. We can do that with a very simple method by looking at, number one, the direction of light, and number two, the direction that the shadows would be placed. I've turned off the lights in my room, and I have a piece of paper that is square-ish, slightly elevated off of my table. I'm going to utilize a light to illustrate my point. The first kind of light we want to look at is a direction that's coming directly from above the square and down. So, as you can see, the arch of light is greatest right at the center. I'll just adjust this a little bit, change the angle a little bit so it's more dramatic looking. And you'll notice that because the light is coming from the top straight down, greatest portion of shadow is going to be right at the bottom. And what's more is that it follows the shape of the rectangle. If I have the light at an angle on this side, you're going to notice that the greatest amount of light is over here, but the shadow then changes shape. It's on the opposite side of where the light is coming from, but we can still see the shape of the square. And here we have the same thing except for the other side. The light is coming from the upper corner straight down. The shadow is on the opposite side of the light, and it takes the shape of the shape that we have in the scene. What happens when we use a different shape like a triangle? The same thing, it's the same formula. A light cast directly from the top down at the object that's a little bit off of the table space will show the actual shape of the object on the opposite side of the light. Changing the angle of the light changes the angle of the shadow on the opposite side of the light. Be aware that the shadow is the same shape as the object here. And for the sake of the argument, we have the light on the opposite side. The shadow is on the opposite side of the light, and it still maintains the shape of the object the light is on. Using what we now know about how light works in real life, and how these shapes would cast shadows if they were in real space slightly lifted off from one another, let's go ahead and excuse me, I have no way to edit that out, so we're just going to go with it. Using what we already know about how light works, we're going to use these three directions of light. A light that's casting straight down, a light that's on the left casting to the right and down, and a light that's on the right casting left and down. Let's start with the one that's coming down. Using a pencil, what I'm going to do is create shadows that show the same shape of the shape on top of it. This square would cast a shadow like this down here on top of the triangle. But here's the thing, the shadow of this rectangle is on top of this triangle, but it would presumably be taller or higher, closer to the camera or your eye than the circle. As you can see in my example here, the light that's cast down, this square is casting a shadow here, but as the shadow, but because the square is taller, it's higher than the triangle, and the square below hand, the square down here, the shadow down here is a little bit wider than the one right here. So when we're taking a look at this shadow over here, this shadow would be a little bit wider than this one next to the triangle. And then we would have the shape of this shadow right here. Now, in this particular case, if it was coming straight down, it might be just a square looking shadow. But for the sake of illusion, we're going to put this shadow at an angle like so. Now, do you have to put a shadow in the background? Not necessarily, unless you want to give the illusion that that these shapes are really close to the ground itself. If the light was coming from this direction and down, then we would see something like this. The shadow wouldn't just be flat, it would come across here. We would see this shape from the square. We would also see this shape from the square over here onto the triangle. And just like the situation over here, the shape of the shadow would be a little bit wider down here, but because the light is coming from this direction, we wouldn't see a line of the shadow coming straight from this line of the square. It actually would be moved over a little bit. So it'd be a little bit wider and a little bit lower, come in like that. And then the same thing over here, but it would start over here, say. Finally, a light from the right-hand side facing down and to the left completely changes everything. First of all, there'd be no shadow on this side since we're not doing that with this particular model. Secondly, all the shadows would be on the opposite side. This shadow would come over here. Actually, you know what? This shadow, since this square is on top of the triangle, it would be about this wide. And because this rectangle is a little bit further away from the circle, we could actually make that a little bit wider and a little bit lower to show the depth of field. Just like that. And then, you know what I'm missing is the shadow from this square to this square. So, because it's coming from this side, it wouldn't start from this line, it would start over a little bit over here. And I'm not going to bring this shadow all the way down here to touch here, because that would be creating a tangent, and even though it might be technically true, you don't want it to look bad. After you're done penciling those in, you can use your marker or whatever material you were utilizing and color in those shapes. Now your assignment is to take that same composition you used to make overlapping shapes with 20 shapes. Consider what kind of drop shadow you want. Where will the light be coming from? And then employ the drop shadow technique on all of your shapes, leaving the background empty. Use a pencil first to make sure that you're happy with what you've got. Then after you're done that, use the Sharpie to color in those shadows, and then use your eraser to clean up any of the extra pencil lines. I just started now, and I wanted to show that even if the angle is different, if the angle changes, make sure the angle of the shadow matches the angle of the shape. And if you have a curved shape, understand that if the light is coming from one direction or another, you might not see a shadow until the curve becomes great enough. Check, double check, and triple check that you have all the shadows in the appropriate places in the appropriate ways. And if you happen to see this video and you think you see an area that I missed, let me know in the comments section. Please like and subscribe for more lessons like this, and I'll have more optical art lessons and other kinds of art lessons for you in the future. Thank you.